Many people today are curious about why exactly testosterone levels have been dropping for decades now. Justin Mares on Twitter recently asked, why does the average 22-year-old today have the testosterone levels of a 67-year-old man from the year 2000? That's how much testosterone has been dropping on average. I've long had a theory about this, which I would like to explore in today's video, which is this. The reason testosterone is declining is because it's increasingly been criminalized. Real quick, before I get into this though, if you're watching on YouTube, please take a second to subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. And if you're listening to this on the podcast, that's cool too. In that case, just kick back. End of that shameless plug. If you think about it, the young guy today who has a lot of testosterone is more likely than not in jail. How do we know this? Well, testosterone we know is linked to aggression, and aggression we know is correlated with incarceration. There's actually a lot of evidence for this. For instance, one study finds that 10 out of 11 inmates with the highest testosterone concentrations also were committed for violent crimes, whereas 9 out of 11 who had committed non-violent crimes had the lowest testosterone levels, meaning even if you look at within prison populations, the people with the highest testosterone are more likely to be violent offenders. You see this in society though as well. It's not hard to understand the intuition because obviously everything that's good about testosterone, it makes you more bold, more courageous in a certain way, willing to take risks. All of those things also have a dark side. They encourage you to engage in all kinds of behaviors that we generally see as reckless and bad as well. What's happened in our society over the past several decades is that you're just not allowed to do that much stuff anymore. Just in general, what you're allowed to do has been circumscribed. This has happened over many decades. It's been a slow process both within institutions and outside of institutions. But the ultimate result is that having high degrees of testosterone and doing the behaviors that that's correlated with just gets you into trouble. So what happens is people, men in particular, learn not to do those things. Their testosterone goes down. And then we live in a culture where those things are not normal. So testosterone goes down even further. And it's a kind of downward spiral. Go watch some movies from the 70s and 80s. In particular, what they sometimes called the road films. There was this whole kind of subgenre in the 70s of people, a wild man kind of stealing a car, going on a wild road trip and adventure. Whether this is kind of a bad story about a villain doing this or a kind of good story about funny, interesting, cool, young people doing this. There are kind of different flavors of this, but this was a whole genre. And that's a very revealing thing. In the 70s, stealing a car was kind of just like a naughty, fun thing to do. Nowadays, you steal a car, you're like only the lowest of the low of social strata. Anyone who seriously steals a car in 2023, you're probably someone at the very bottom of society with no prospects and absolutely no status. There's no one today who thinks stealing a car is in any way funny, interesting, fun, cool, or impressive. There's just no good associated with it whatsoever. Whereas in the 70s, it was something that, slightly wayward men would do occasionally. And if you go and watch these movies, you'll see what I'm talking about. That's always been one of my favorite illustrations of this point, that high testosterone activity, high testosterone ways of living and behaving are now just severely punished and stigmatized. Back then in the 70s and 80s, doing risky stuff, not just stealing cars, things like getting into bar fights or accidentally killing a guy at a party or something like that. This stuff happened. You can see this across the movies from the 70s and 80s. And it was like not good. That's never been condoned or approved of, but it was not unheard of either. That's the kind of stuff that happens in a higher testosterone society. Well, it turns out we don't actually like that. We don't want that. And our society has, whether we like it or not, slowly evolved in a way to get really good at preventing that kind of stuff from happening. One main way that that's happened is law enforcement has evolved and has become much more efficient and effective. Back in the 70s or 80s, you could steal a car and have a decent chance of getting away with it. Maybe not always, but think about it. There wasn't elaborate tracking systems. There wasn't the surveillance system that we have today. There wasn't GPS-enabled devices everywhere. There wasn't a deeply elaborate federal database of auto theft and things of this nature. Now we have all of those things, and it's just simply much harder to get away with this kind of testosterone-loaded activity. If you think of smartphones, for instance, we all carry around in our pocket law enforcement surveillance devices, but also laws and institutions have become more pacifying. In general, the laws in Western societies have become better and better and more effective at prohibiting testosterone-loaded activities. Just to stick with the example of Grand Theft Auto, the 1992 Anti-Car Theft Act, for instance, would be an example in this regard. Like back in the 70s and 80s, there just were not very good laws preventing this kind of wild activity for men to do occasionally. They improved this over time. And so it's only in 1992 that there's like a fully fledged kind of national prohibition system with databases connecting across states and all of that kind of stuff. That only really gets like fully defined and implemented in 1992.
Hey everybody, this is just a quick interruption to invite you to the new Other Life community. We are now really moving in the direction of a network state. It's pretty crazy. We will give you a fully fledged personal server and a special desktop application from our partners at the Holium Company, which will let you and all of the members in the community compute together on the peer-to-peer censor-proof Urbit network. It's still early, but it's insanely cool. If you're into the Other Life ethos, like if you're a writer or a software developer or whatever, if you're all about freedom and self-reliance outside of institutions, then we want to meet you. The community is now totally free to join. We have other ways now of filtering and sorting people later based on their abilities. It's kind of like the USA of the 1840s. Anyone could get on a ship and go to America, but only some would rise to ranks depending on what they were able to do. To join, just go to otherlife.co/join. That's otherlife.co/join.
Basically, we now have this situation where there are even legal activities that are highly correlated with testosterone, which even though they're not illegal, they're quote unquote toxic, right? We live in this culture nowadays where everything that's a little bit too aggressive is just very stigmatized. So rudeness, just being a kind of loudmouth, nasty, vicious man is highly, highly frowned upon, and it's socially punished in a way that it was not back in the day. Again, you can see this in movies and books. There was just a kind of like Archie Bunker type guy, right? If you think about the Archie Bunker character, but you can think of many other examples. There used to be a certain kind of just absolutely irritable, nasty, even cruel man who said what he wanted, when he wanted. And I'm not necessarily saying this is cool or good. I'm not saying it's virtuous. I'm just saying this type of man used to exist. And these are testosterone-laden behaviors. This is the kind of stuff that's correlated with testosterone. But nowadays, you try to be that kind of guy, or if you are that kind of guy, from a very early stage of your life, you're going to be punished and kind of put to the bottom of all social lists and social opportunities. Like this starts now in grade school, right? If you're a high testosterone young boy in like 5th grade, you're going to be getting detention. You're going to be getting suspended. You're going to be getting stigmatized with this kind of like very anti-masculine, anti-testosterone culture that we have today. When I say that testosterone has been gradually criminalized, I mean that both in the official sense, the technical legal sense, but also informally, it's become criminalized informally as well. It's no wonder when you look at these two trends that we live in a lower testosterone society, the average testosterone levels are lower. If you have higher testosterone, you exit the pool, as it were. You leave society in a way. That goes a long way in explaining why testosterone has decreased, and it makes perfect sense. If things are badly punished, you're not going to do those things. Biochemicals are going to change accordingly. But then in the next stage, people are going to do those things even less because the biochemicals are affected in that way. I think that there has been a cycle over the past few decades where males learn that testosterone is punished. This causes the changes in biochemistry, and then in turn, the biochemistry causes behaviors to become even less prevalent. This is the tricky part. People feel nostalgic for a high testosterone society. You see this all over the place, right? People are constantly sharing on Twitter and TikTok and whatever, these like aestheticized, idealized images of what people used to look like in the 70s and 80s. You know, men looked healthier and stronger, and we did more interesting, badass behaviors, and our culture was more vitalistic. This is the kind of stuff you see all over social media today. It's a very popular meme, but this is really a kind of cheap and naive kind of romantic memory, because the fact is that our society has become lower testosterone society because we really do dislike the attitudes and behaviors that are correlated with testosterone. The same people who lament the decline of testosterone dislike those portions of our society that get into fights, that steal things from stores. The same people will lament the unruly, undisciplined lower classes who are engaging in dissolute behaviors. Well, those things are correlated with testosterone. And so there's this kind of naive, frankly hypocritical viewpoint today that's very popular that's like, oh, it's so bad that we're seeing lower levels of testosterone. We need higher testosterone. And also, oh, I'm so disappointed and terrified by these unruly lower classes who are shoplifting and looting stores. Well, those two things are correlated. And if you want more of one, you're going to have to bite the bullet of more of the other. And that's why there's a lot of confusion around this. And I think this is why people don't understand why testosterone has declined. I'm not saying it's good. I personally would prefer probably a higher testosterone society. but that's because I like getting into fights and being outrageous and shoplifting and things like this. I've changed my ways on that, by the way. I don't condone that anymore, and I don't do that anymore. But nonetheless, I'm the personality type that would welcome a more rough and tumble culture where men can curse at each other in public and be rude and irritable and not really care. When I act like that with a lot of people I know, they kind of look down at me, or they kind of stick their nose up at me, because it's uncouth, it's classless, it's seen as low status, and rightfully so, because it's a kind of animalistic, dangerous, nasty, seedy way to think and live and behave. This, I think, is a very interesting kind of contradiction that's very widespread today that I haven't really seen many people talk about very much. I think when you understand this, you kind of start to see that the decline of testosterone, while I don't like it, and it is kind of sad because it leads to a very kind of low energy, uniform, homogenous, weak kind of culture, it is driven by things that we actually generally want, which is peace, kindness, stability. I think if you want to boost testosterone levels in society, you better be willing to bite the bullet of increasing crime and violence. Here's the bottom line. Testosterone has declined because we've made it illegal. So if you're lamenting the decline of testosterone, then remember there are trade-offs involved. What do you think? Would you really like a higher testosterone society? I would love to hear what you think. If you took something from this, please make sure you subscribe on YouTube and get the podcast on your favorite podcast app, wherever or however you like to listen to it. Thank you very much for your interest. I appreciate you all. I am Justin Murphy, and this is Other Life. I'm out of here.